email? What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or
The
news.
single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett.
I'm very excited to be joined today by Deborah Borg. Deborah currently holds the position of Chief HR and Communications Officer at Bunge, a role she's been in since 2016. Prior to that, Deborah served as the president of Dow Chemical USA, spent time in HR and talent development at General Motors Australia, and earned her master's degree in training and change management from Victoria University. We'll get into all that and much, much more, but first, welcome to the podcast, Deborah.
Thanks, Clint. Nice to be here.
Nice to have you. Now, you're currently the Chief HR and Communications Officer at Bunge, but as I stated in the introduction, this isn't your first gig. In fact, I believe I read you were with your previous company for 17 years. Tell us a little bit about how you got where you are today, what some of your previous roles were, educational achievements, and really what was your initial interest in HR and communications?
Yeah, definitely. Well, you're right. I was at Dow Chemical for 17 years, and it was a wonderful 17 years. But it all started back with General Motors. So I was the child of immigrant parents, and that meant it was a given that I was going to go to college. I really wasn't too sure what I was going to study at college, but I had this amazing teacher called Mark. His name was Mark Badley. I was really interested in the social sciences. I was really interested in the law. So I had kind of gravitated to those subjects. And Mark was the one, or Mr. Badley, as he was known to me, was the one that directed me to study HR. And he was like, I think you might try this field. It was a field that was becoming unto its own at the time. And it ended up being the best decision I could have made. I went to Victoria University. I studied HR. I did my first job was with General Motors, as you said. And they had a tremendous program at the university I studied. They had a program where you studied for 2 years and then you went off to practical placement and worked for a year, and then you went back and finished your university degree. So I went to GM for that year, and they gave me a really well-rounded kind of experience of different parts and facets of HR. I convinced the university to allow me to continue to study part-time, which they graciously agreed to, and it ended up being a great decision because GM asked me to stay on and just finish my degree part-time. But I got really interested in organizational effectiveness and organizational development. So this whole dimension of where human capital meets business. From the GM days, I stayed with GM for a number of years, then went on to Dow Chemical and started there in Australia. From there, I was in a series of roles, but decided that I really wanted to be in roles that were closer to the business and the strategy side of what the business was trying to do. And those roles didn't exist in Australia at the time for Dow, so I applied for a job in Switzerland, got the job in Switzerland, spent a number of years there, then moved on to headquarters in Michigan, did a series of roles in and out of HR, mostly in HR, but in and out of HR. And then most recently, as you mentioned, I was leading Dow North America, which was 25,000 people, 21 billion in revenue. It was a tremendous experience. Learned a lot of things. I mean, Dow was very gracious in kind of moving you around every couple of years. It was a great training ground. They built a lot of breadth and depth in people and gave them really broad functional roles, which is something that I'm very committed to now in my role as a Chief HR Officer and trying to build that in the people that work with me and on the team in Bunge. I joined Bunge late 2015, became the Chief HR and Communications Officer in 2016. And I was really just interested in, one, going back to my roots in HR, and I aspired to get to that Chief HR Officer role. The opportunity came about with Bunge. They were a customer of mine when I was running Down North America. So I got to know the company and the culture and really fascinated by what this company did. And now it's been nearly 7 years with Bunge, and we've seen a lot of change. The world has seen a lot of change in that 6 to 7 years. And so the work is never boring. Let me put it that way. But it's been a really fun journey to be part of with Bunge.
So what were some of the major shifts in hiring and recruitment that you saw taking place during the pandemic? And what were some of the surprising things that changed for the better that you think will continue to do as we move forward? And what are some of the things you'll be happy to see become a relic of the pandemic?
Oh wow, yeah, the lessons learned. I feel like we're still learning them every day. I think one of the biggest shifts was the shift in perspective that people got, and that led to a number of things. I mean, we are not seeing the Great Resignation in great numbers like some companies are seeing or have seen, but we certainly saw people have a lot of perspective. They were starting to be much more vocal about this is what I want, this is what I expect out of an employer. I think employees found their voice during that period, which was both a wonderful thing and a tiring thing in terms of being able to respond to all of that. But it also really ignited the need for connecting people to purpose. So, what purpose their roles had, what purpose the company played, what purpose, the greatest societal impact that we could make in the company, and so that became, I think we really focused in on this incredible value proposition that Bunge has in connecting farmers to consumers around the world and feeding people was a really great societal purpose that was a great thing to lean into. So I would say we lent in a lot more to the value proposition and the purpose of the company. We moved our headquarters from New York City to St. Louis, Missouri during the pandemic, which was interesting. We had announced it just before the pandemic began. We announced it, I think, in September of 2019, and we had, I planned to sublease the building that we were in New York by June 2020. So for us, there was a lot of hiring that needed to take place to pick up the jobs in St. Louis that weren't going to move with us. And I would say that, so we saw a lot on the recruitment front for sure. I would say the pandemic was also quite helpful to us in that some people that had elected not to join us and come across to St. Louis changed their minds during the pandemic and said if that's still an option, if it's still an offer, one, moving out of the big city, which was a big trend going on during the pandemic. And the second was just, I know the company, I have a degree of uncertainty about what the world's going to look like. So staying connected to something that feels more certain felt better to some employees. And so that was a good thing for us. We had a higher number of people kind of accept the move to St. Louis. Last year alone, we hired 1,800 people around the world. So the hiring machine has been very active. And I would say there have been pockets that have been much harder to source talent from. Again, I think this perspective, and I want to be able to work from anywhere, and really having to rethink what those benefits and that value proposition was going to be. How do you maintain culture in a time where people aren't as present physically with one another as they were before? We were changing the way we thought as a leadership team. It was challenging everybody around the world to have to think about what the future was going to look like. For sure, it was going to look different. No one really, I still think today, although it's coming into vision closer, but I think even today we don't really know exactly where it's gonna land. But I would say, I think the things that were really beneficial during that time that we want to retain, it was really an accelerant for inclusion, and the fact that you could meet anybody around the world whenever you wanted to on the other side of a TV screen or on the other side of a laptop was available to us. We never really used it, and so all of a sudden these voice conferences that you would have with your teams around the world turned into video conferences, and you were hearing voices that wouldn't otherwise unmute themselves to say anything because they couldn't get a word in edgewise. So I would say it was a lot more inclusive, and that's something that we're really being intentional about trying to retain. And why do we need to be with three people in a room and the other two on a phone? Can we not just do everybody on the other side of a screen and kind of neutralize or make the environment the same for everybody? So everybody gets to see body language and everybody gets to participate. So we heard from a lot of I would say, our minority voices that they felt heard and they felt included because information was being sent by email. It wasn't just who you bumped into in the water at the water cooler. So some of those things I think are really important to retain, and we're trying to be really intentional about how we retain them. I think the other thing that we're trying to retain or maintain is leaders connecting with their employees and employees connecting with one another at a really personal level. People were going through a lot, and there was a lot of empathy that was demonstrated during that time. You got to see people's children and cats and all of the things that they were trying to juggle in their lives. And so you got to see more of the whole person. And I think that is something, again, you want to continue, although we would rather not be on the other side of a screen all the time with one another. I think there were also things that we wouldn't want to continue. I think boundaries got really, really blurred during that period of time. There wasn't really a separation of work and home. It was, yes, I can take a call at 10 o'clock at night. Why not? I think became unhealthy to some extent from a mental health perspective. You no longer had that 20-minute drive home or that break that said now it's home time or it's family time. And so we've really, again, tried to be very intentional about giving people permission to take those breaks, to really create a separation for themselves. So that's one thing that I personally, wouldn't want to revert back to, or I need to try to unlearn some of those behaviors that we learned, where it's kind of always on, and it doesn't matter. It's just a quick phone call, and I'm still in my sweatpants, so it doesn't really matter. But it was work nonetheless, So so I think there's some things that I hope don't stay.
It's really subtle. I read about this recently that in a live, and I'm a big, huge fan of face to face. I just love it, especially if we could be in the room together and I could see all of your body language. But there is this subtlety of people that are really tall tend to dominate over people that are small. But when you're on the screen, you're all the same size. You pick your windows and it's a subtlety that I hadn't really picked up on, but it kind of made sense.
That's so true. Everybody's equal. I mean, you have this equalizer, and through much of this, you would meet people for the first time. As I said, we hired 1,800 people around the world during just last year alone, about the same number the year before. And you meet these people now for the first time, and they're much taller than you thought they would be, or they're much shorter than you thought they would be. So you're seeing different parts of people now, which is lovely. I love being back in person.
Yeah, I'm on a team right now where I never met these individuals in person before, and saw on the screen they look the same size. But one of the sponsors of the project was mentioning to the other person, "How tall are you?" And the guy's 6'11".
Oh wow!
You never would have picked it up on the screen. I mean,
that's a big person.
Yeah, he played basketball at Wake Forest, so
it would be a shame not to use that talent to play basketball. Yeah, absolutely. But
sure.
Yeah, you're right. Everyone's the same. Everyone is. So I think it was a bit of an equalizer in many ways.
Yeah. And you kind of touched on this already, but Bunge has been around for over 200 years. I think I saw you recently, maybe it's been a few years ago now, celebrating your 200th anniversary, and you have over 20,000 employees worldwide. So I'm apologizing on my behalf that I did not recognize the brand name, but what exactly does Bunge do?
Yeah, it's not a household name in the US, that's for sure. But Bunge, effectively, we feed the world. So we connect farmers to consumers around the world. We get products from where they're grown at the farm gate to where they're needed, and we process them in between. So we may just trade a commodity product like a soybean or wheat or barley, or we will take that wheat and we'll turn it into flour and we'll sell it as flour, or we'll turn it into a cake mix in certain markets and sell it that way. So anything that begins life as a grain or an oil seed, soybean is one of the biggest things that we deal with, and we'll again take that and trade it as a soybean around the world to countries or companies that need them, or we will process them all the way to vegetable oil that you'll see on supermarket shelves. We don't have household brands here in the United States. We have many household brands in some of our bigger markets like Brazil, or Poland or Ukraine, where we have bottled oil on the shelves that would be brands that most people would know. But we're largely a B2B company. We're not a business to consumer company so much. So it's the industries that we particularly service. Food is foremost. Fuel, so a lot of plant-based products go into fuel production, and feed. Meal to feed chickens, poultry, hogs, etc. So it's a really noble cause. It's a company that has a great purpose, and I think the pandemic shone a light on this as well. We were deemed an essential industry, which was very helpful, and we were very glad to be able to continue to operate all the way through the pandemic. I think it ignited or reignited a sense of pride for our employees that they were doing something that the world really needed, that needed to continue despite what was going on outside. And I think it really highlighted the essential role in ensuring food security and availability around the world, which continues today and is amplified a little bit by what's going on in the Black Sea with the war in Ukraine at the moment.
Yeah, for sure. Now, clear communication and messaging is always important, but with so much unknown and things changing so rapidly, particularly at the beginning of the pandemic, communication efforts and clear messaging were more important than ever. What was your messaging strategy as an organization? What did you think worked best, and what did you learn?
Yeah, one of the first things we did, and all of this is, necessity, is the mother of invention, as they say, right? So, when the pandemic first started, we had just shifted our operating model to a global operating model, and there were a number of communication strategies associated with doing that, or in service of driving that. We accelerated some of those, and the pandemic accelerated some of those for us. So, who do we need to communicate with? What are the channels that we have in existence to be able to communicate to them? We needed to create two-way communication channels. We needed to have, a consistent voice to all employees around the world. This is how we're managing the pandemic. This is what it means to us. We saw the pandemic break in China in our business in China first, and I don't think had any belief that it would be a much bigger thing than just China at the time. So the messaging strategy was, first of all, who are the audiences that we need to communicate with? At what frequency do we plan to communicate with them? And do we have the technology channels in place to be able to do that? The second was, what's important to us to communicate was, one, to help mitigate uncertainty for employees. This is how we're dealing with it. This is what we see. We have a very transparent culture. We have a big belief in we'll need to make tough decisions, but we will always give you the benefit of understanding the thought process behind the decisions that are being made. So we shut down a number of businesses prior to the pandemic. We were doing some work on perfecting our footprint and portfolio, getting out of businesses where we didn't feel that we deserved the right to win, that other companies in another set of hands, the business would be more successful. And they were tough decisions, but we made a very firm commitment to, we'll communicate with you along the way why those decisions are being made. So that kind of rang through during the pandemic as well, that we needed to have the two-way communication. We needed to stay consistent with messaging. We needed to help alleviate employees' minds in a world of uncertainty of, this is what the company is doing, this is what they're doing to support you, and knowing that we didn't have all of the answers. I think we also learned, during many of the trying times in the last 2 years, we had the pandemic, we had Black Lives Matter, we had a lot of social justice issues around the world, and I think our messaging strategy was very clear that you can't and shouldn't have a voice on everything. That there's a role for companies to play. We needed to lean into the issues that were core to our values or core to our business being successful. And there were many things that weren't core to the business. So employees wanted you to opine on everything from the death penalty in the United States, for example. And you feel a sense of servancy to employees to help educate them around why or why not. But we were really steadfast with, there's a place for our voice, and there's a place for when we need to opine on something that is in service of our organization, in service of our business. Black Lives Matter was an easy one for us because we have equality as a major value in the company, and so we felt that was a topic that we needed to speak out on and talk about how we felt about it as a company. But it challenged us. It challenged us to not succumb to the social pressure of opining on absolutely everything. There was a lot of criticism, and as soon as you put something out there in the universe, you have some people that don't agree with your point of view. And so we found that we had to become louder in our communications in many instances, and that was a good thing. It was a challenging thing because we didn't want to be loud on every issue. But it was, a lot of lessons. But I would say our messaging strategy was, here are the issues that we feel that we really need to be strong on and opine on. And we really need our employees to hear a consistent, clear communication about what we stand for, what's important to us, how we see the world unfolding as COVID was unfolding and changing every 3 minutes. And certainly, where you needed to have a global point of view and where you couldn't have a global point of view. Government regulations were different in different countries. The pandemic was unfolding in different ways in different countries. So it was very clear that we needed an overarching set of principles, and that every country needed to be able to take that set of principles and adapt that to what was happening on the ground. Decisions had to be made close to where the action was happening, and I think part of our messaging was also really trying to drive we can't control everything from Command Central here in the United States. It doesn't look the same everywhere. So you test, I think, moments like any crisis tests trust and tests empowerment and tests all of those things. And again, good things that I think and I hope we continue beyond the pandemic as well.
Well, I want to dig more on the ED&I in a minute, but talking about communication, so far I've heard you mention email being a positive thing because now there's documentation essentially of things that have been talked about. But then in that last comment you just made, you had two-way conversations, which I think are so important. I don't know if you ever played the game. We have it in the U.S. called Telephone.
Yeah.
And so for those who don't know, the game as a kid is you have a secret, you whisper to the next person who then whispers that secret on down the line. And of course, by the time it comes out of kid number 5, it's completely mangled. And because each person, if you think about it in a business perspective, each person receives that message through their own filter of how they define terms, what kind of day they're having, how they interpret what you said, and then they regurgitate it to the next person who then interprets it again. So it's no surprise which is the fun of the game, that it gets so mangled at the end. But if you have two-way conversations with each individual person to the next one, they're able to ask those clarifying questions, and the message can be more succinct and stay more true to form throughout the number of people that it passes through.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think the other thing that was very clear to us, so like most global companies, we have multiple nationalities. We have over 60 nationalities, and I would say we have probably over 60 nationalities just in our St. Louis office alone. So where you needed to write communications, where written communications were going to be important so that everyone could read the same thing versus when verbal communication would have been enough. Where it was a really important message, we wrote a lot of leader talking points. These are the 4 things we want all of your people to hear. So I would say, I was going to use the word spoon-fed, that's not fair, but we really were much more deliberate about, we don't want this to get misinterpreted, knowing that there's a degree of that, there's a degree of translation that takes place no matter whether you write it down or not. But on the really important topics, on the big topics and topics where, travel, we will only allow vaccinated employees to travel. They must be approved by this level of person. We were really in the place of just trying to keep our people safe. And we didn't want that to be misinterpreted by just verbal communication. So we had written communication. So part of the strategy was when to write it down, when to write leader talking points, when you need more voices to be saying the same thing, and again, feeding them with what you want them to say, and when written was better than just verbal communication.
So we've kind of been talking about it already, but there's this equality, diversity, inclusion. This is all a very poignant in the moment, right? It's a very popular topic. And what changes do you think as a society we've gotten right? And where do you think maybe we've fallen short? And what should companies be doing today to make sure that they are being as inclusive as possible?
Wow. I think what we've gotten right or getting right is really leading with the inclusion part of that equation, right? That the inclusion conquers a lot. If you can really create an inclusive environment, and that comes with some structural things that need to be put in place, or structural barriers that need to be eliminated to enable inclusion. I think leading with that, the outcome will be a much more diverse organization, society, et cetera, at the other end. So I think that's one thing that we're getting right. I wouldn't say that we've certainly got it all the way right, but I think that there was a lot that pointed us to inclusion during this period of time. Like I said, just even the way we communicate with one another, who we're including in on calls that we may not have otherwise included in, et cetera. I think we also saw the plight of many minorities and working parents and many different populations of people, either through their access or lack thereof to healthcare or to childcare. So we saw a lot more during the last 2 years. That was really hard to see because those of us that haven't experienced those things would like to believe that it doesn't exist. And so I think that kind of showcased things in a way that you can't ignore, you can't turn your head. It really helped to kind of, I think, acknowledge or highlight some of the big issues that have been formed over years and years and years that really needed to be resolved. Like I mentioned before, I think there was much more empathy in the last 2 years where people could empathize with. I never had to think about people that didn't have access to healthcare before, and now it's in my face on the media every day. So, I would say we've gotten that right. I think we've diluted the efforts a little bit. I think diversity, equity, inclusion is such a big topic, a big area, and I fear that it can feel a little diluted. We're trying to solve for a whole lot of things, and are we really solving the ecosystem that on maybe a narrower topic, getting through that and moving on to others. But I think overall the last 2 years on balance have been a real accelerant for diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts in general. I think just the awareness that's been created and the focus on understanding the biases that exist in society that have existed for a long time has been a really positive thing to be able to create movement. But now I think it's all about taking action on that move. It really is. I think there's a lot more will and a lot more desire and a lot more visibility of what needs to be changed. I think that we're still short on accountability and action and just moving things in the right direction. I think that's where all of our focus needs to be.
Okay, that's great. Now, you obviously have a tremendous amount of experience in HR and recruiting globally for many large organizations. I was just curious, if someone out there wants to land their dream job or even just get an interview at Company X, what advice do you have for them? Any inside tips or tricks to grab their attention?
Oh, I've had some pretty interesting things come my way about how how people get attention. I would say your first job here is to get the interview. So leaning into networks to get the interview, being able to position yourself to be able to represent yourself. And I've had people write letters personally to the CEO that gets attention. I've had people just tap into networks to get attention. Sometimes the resume alone to a job posting site isn't it. So who do you know in the company? Have you done your homework about the company? That kind of thing. And then I think once you have the opportunity to present yourself and represent yourself, do your homework. There's nothing more off-putting than somebody that turns up for an interview and they haven't done their homework about the company. I was very impressed, Clint, that when we started talking, you knew my background and you knew that my connection back to the motherland of Malta. And then being clear about the value that you bring. You don't have a long period of time to be able to represent yourself necessarily in an interview. And so I think, being really succinct and clear about what are the 3 messages that you want to impart when you get there. And why the organization might need you. So there's nothing more exciting to me than being in an interview where someone says, "Here's what I think I can do and how I can create value for your organization." Gets my attention at least. So as an interviewer.
No, that's fantastic. Another one of the things I think that has concerned me a bit during the pandemic is obviously many, if not most of us, have been working remotely. Mm-hmm. And I really kind of feel bad for the person that was hired over the past couple of years. They've probably never met their coworkers in person. They've only seen them on the screen, on video calls. And what do you think that person can do to really build rapport with their teammates, to establish a connection when you're not in the office and you don't see each other on the breaks and talk about non-business stuff? And then on the other side of that is, I've always felt company culture was something that you observed when the person didn't actually know they were being observed. Like when they hang up the phone, how do they respond? Do they, shout or curse or you kind of see what goes on in the background? And then internally, you always kind of find a mentor inside an organization that you're attracted to say, help me learn how to succeed in this organization. And I'm curious, how do we deal with all that in a work from home or even a hybrid environment? I know there's a lot to unpack there, but I'm just curious your thoughts.
Yeah, definitely a difficult time for people starting with companies, when it's fully remote. I think in some ways a good thing in that you can meet a lot of people around the world very quickly. When I first onboarded with Bunge, it was a tour of duty. It took me 12 months to get out to every major location that we had and meet people in those major locations. And I don't know that we would have been smart enough back then to say, well, there's another way that you can meet these people without having to get on a plane and wait 6 months until you can get on a plane to go and visit. So I think in part, there's an accelerator there in terms of being able to meet more people. I think you're right. Breaking bread with someone, having a cup of coffee with someone, feels very, very different. And I think you get to know people much differently than just, we've got a purpose to be able to have to talk. So I think creating those intentional moments where let's just grab a coffee with someone for 30 minutes, and you can do that by video as well. We really lent in from our HR team to restructure the onboarding program for people that were joining through the pandemic. And again, I think something that we will continue with, to give them quick access. Here are the people. We want your days to feel full because it's going to be lonely. You're sitting on the other side of you're sitting somewhere in a home office and you can't keep yourself busy. You don't really know what work needs to get done in short order. So we did a lot of shadowing. We did a lot of, you're going to sit on Teams with this person and just watch them get their job done. And you're going to do some version of virtual shadowing. We want you to meet with these 40 people in your first week in the company. And it's going to be a 30-minute speed dating thing, like get to know them. There is no business topic. Let's just learn about them as a person. They'll learn about you as a person. And so I think, trying to create moments like that where, do you mind, let's grab a coffee together. It's a very artificial way of grabbing a coffee with someone. But I think trying to bridge what you would normally do face to face, I think, and again, I think that's something that will continue with post the pandemic. I think rapport comes from repetition. As much time as you can spend, more time that you spend with people, the more you get to know them, how they work, how they operate, how they think, what their triggers are, etc. So repetition is a good thing. I really worry about the learning environment, the mentorship. That's the biggest worry I have in my chair is, we all learn by seeing, we all learn by following. What habits are the habits that are successful around here, and that's really hard to impart in a virtual setting. I don't know that we've cracked the code, and there are companies that have gone fully remote and are figuring out how to crack the code with that. But again, I think it's as much as you can create those situations where people have to have those learning moments. They do feel a little more artificial, I will say, than when you're sitting in an office. But it's the one thing we worry about the most. We don't worry about productivity. Our business was extremely productive during COVID. People worked super hard. We worry more about culture, and we worry more about like losing the element of culture. The thing that makes your company special. And so we're now back. We're back on a hybrid basis. We've got a lot of colleagues that have to come into facilities every day, but we've got our office workers that can come in on a hybrid basis. And we're very excited to be back and have some more of that in-person learning, mentoring, watching, and people meeting their colleagues for the first time, which is super exciting.
It really is. And you get to know so much about them on those serendipitous breaks at the coffee machine or the water cooler. You get to know about they have kids and what their kids do. And you establish humans want to connect to other humans. And so I think we do that through conversation that it's not business related. It's the innocuous, one-off, serendipitous kind of conversations that really drive that.
Absolutely. And like I said, I think one of the nice things was, I ended up setting up a coffee talk once a week, same time, every week. Dial in if you want, don't dial in if you don't want. There is no expectation. And you would have a lot of the same people that would turn up, and then you would have some people that would pop in and pop out in different weeks. And I got to know so many more people from my team, from the broader HR team that live in different countries around the world that would pop in for a coffee on a Tuesday morning. And again, that I wouldn't otherwise do unless I was visiting their country. So these are things that I want to continue with because, there's no, I think we'll travel differently. I don't think we'll travel as frequently. It's a thesis right now. We haven't really gone back to travel in earnest as we were before the pandemic. But now we've been taught that there are different ways that you can do that, right? There are different ways that you can have that coffee and that water cooler chat with somebody. And I'm really pleased that we can do some in person, but I really don't want to lose the not in person ones just for the people that aren't physically in the same location as me. I learned a lot more about the great team that I have around the world. So I'll take that as the COVID plus.
Yeah, I think one of the other things that I've read about over the pandemic was even when we do come back to maybe most of us are in the office, but there are still some that are remote. It's really, I think it's important to be purposeful and maybe ask them to contribute first. Because normally what happens to those people is people in the room, as you kind of alluded to earlier in the conversation, they get the attention.
They just dominate, yeah.
And then what happens is people on the call, they get the dregs when all the good points have already been made. So maybe it's good to occasionally start with the people on the phone first and let them make the epiphany.
Absolutely.
Now, from your time at GM and Dow Chemical to now at Bunge and everything in between, what's been your proudest career accomplishment to date? The one thing you'll be bragging about forever?
Oh, wow. I'll probably brag about a lot of things, Clint. No, I'm kidding. No, I for sure the professional careers of the people that I've led or mentored. When I wouldn't say I've been the only one that's had a role in this, but I've had a hand in creating 3 incredible chief HR officers that are chief HR officers of different companies now. And so for sure, when I point to the highlights of my career, it's I helped that person get to where to get them to be able to fulfill their maximum potential. And I had a hand in that by mentoring them, by sitting in the talent discussion that helped elevate them, by giving them a voice when they didn't have a voice for a number of different reasons. But for sure, I think I'll always point to. I mean, I'm proud of many, many things. We've built a lot of great things, but the thing I'll be most proud of is the careers I've helped to put on a pedestal.
That's awesome. I think we always take more pride in what we see other people accomplish than we do ourselves. So that's
Totally,
good.
Yeah.
Looking forward for yourself. What's your big dream? What's your pie in the sky goal for yourself?
Wow. Okay, so personally, it's to visit all of the top chef restaurants around the world. So I'm a big fan of the TV show Top Chef, and I watched a lot of reality TV during the pandemic. I had zero heart for the news and zero heart for, I didn't want to watch anything depressing. I couldn't even watch Breaking Bad at some point. I was like, the world is too dark a place right now, and I just need some levity. And so Top Chef was my happy place. I rewatched the whole, every season I had already watched. And so I've made a pact with my husband that we're going to go to every Top Chef restaurant, or every restaurant of the Top Chef contestants. Personally, I think, really it's about or professionally, I should say, it's really about using this incredible platform that you have when you are, the chief people officer of a 20,000 person company to create opportunity for others. And that comes in with structure that you create. It's not only the lives of the 20,000 direct people, it's the farmers we work with, it's the customers that we work with on the other side of the chain. And so this whole ecosystem that we get the chance to contribute to, it's something I do every day. It'll be a lifelong process. It to me, success when I look back on my rocking chair, when I'm 90, will be that I did go to all of the Top Chef restaurants and that I created opportunity for other people. And I'm sure that's going to manifest itself in many, many different ways.
That's awesome. Well, I know we only have a few minutes left, so let me cut through these last questions kind of quickly. But are there any leadership principles that speak to you personally and guide you on your day-to-day behaviors?
I would say one is servant leadership. Leadership is all about followership. People want to come with you and climb the hill with you. So it's all about recognizing and acknowledging every day that you can't do it alone. It's okay to be vulnerable as a leader. I think COVID really shone a light on that, not knowing the answers to things. These leadership roles can tend to feel quite isolating and lonely. And, so I think being able to be vulnerable and say, I don't know, I need help me think through this. We were experiencing a lot of firsts in the last couple of years. And so it was okay to say, I don't know. No one had seen anything like this before. So, knowing who you are and knowing where you need help. And I think that's important. And then I think, your number one job is to coach other people. It's to make them believe and see that what they can do. And oftentimes that means believing in others more than they believe in themselves. And I think the best leaders I've worked with are the ones that said, why wouldn't you go and be the head of Dow US? Why wouldn't you go into this job? We see it in you. So whenever you have these moments of self-doubt or self-beliefs, having this great coach behind you or a mentor behind you that says, no, I see it in you. So I think it's our number one job is to believe in others and to see, to use that, to certainly see their talents and be able to play to their strengths, but also to help them see what they can't see in themselves.
Yeah, that answer does not surprise me based on everything you've said so far in the conversation. So what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Oh, probably something around time being your most valuable resource. So by saying yes to that, you're saying no to something else. What's the thing that you're saying no to implicitly? And, so really being intentional about where to spend your time and what to say no to so that you have time to spend on the things that you can create more value in. And it's a hard thing. Your ego, is a big driving force. You get to where you are because you have accomplished a number of different things and you see that at, those success traits. So what got you here won't get you there. So saying yes to all the same things just won't serve you as you continue to go forward. So being really intentional about when to say no, I think is probably the best advice I've been given.
And that's hard because as human beings, we want to say yes. And so somebody once told me the same thing. They said, don't think of it as no, just think that allows you to say yes to something else.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah, exactly. And when you can change that paradigm and the way you think about that, the way you see that, it's, by doing it yourself, one of the other pieces of advice is by doing it yourself, you're bypassing the opportunity for someone else to develop themselves. So, as a leader, I had a big personal belief that there's nothing I will ask my team to do that I wouldn't do myself. And if we need to stay in the office until midnight, we stay in the office together until midnight. And so sometimes I would, early on in my leadership journey, I would take things on myself. I'm like, I'll just take care of it. I don't want to annoy that person by having to interrupt their world. And I had this one leader who, helped me see that by doing that, you're really taking away the opportunity for someone else to be visible, to show what they can do. It was coming from a very genuine place of trying to be helpful, but being able to see that and say, there's a role to support, and I'll still stay in the office until midnight to support, but giving somebody else the opportunity to work on that can be a really positive thing. So it's a little bit parallel to what do I say yes to or no to myself.
Right. So finally, I know you're from Malta, and I was curious, what was it like growing up there in this beautiful paradise?
Oh, it is a paradise of a country. Honestly, I don't remember growing up in Malta. So I left Malta when I was 2.
Okay.
So I don't have a lot of memories of growing up in Malta. Although, I have a very, very large family that's there. My mum was one of 12 children, and all the others, besides one, her and a brother had immigrated. The others are all there, and their children and their children. So all my cousins and grand cousins and the like are all there. So I still have a lot of affiliation to the country. And I would say that the biggest thing I'm reminded of every time I go back, my dad was one of 5, but all of his siblings had immigrated. So there's not a big extended family in Malta on his side. But every time I go back, I mean, it's family means everything. And, it's a good Southern European family. So family means everything. They have zero care for what I do Monday to Friday, which is beautiful. They don't know what I do. They don't care what I do. It's all about, did you show respect to your aunt and get to your aunt's birthday when you needed to get to your aunt's birthday? So the family values is something I love the most about the homeland.
This has been great, Deborah. Thanks so much for the conversation.
It was great to meet you. Thank you so much, Clint.
Thanks for listening to The Conversation. To find out more about Clint, go to clintonmpaget.com and pick up Clint's book, How Teams Triumph, Managing by Commitment, at Amazon. The Conversation with Clinton M. Paget is a production of Forbes Books.